From Evoke Media, I'm Sabrina Mirage Naeem. With me is Cassia Binkowski, and this is Breaking Glass, a series of conversations with women around the world who are shattering glass ceilings and challenging social norms. They are audacious, gutsy, and their stories are echoed across borders and generations in a rallying cry that is changing the narrative for women everywhere. We head to Tokyo today to have a timely discussion on the mental health of Japanese women during the pandemic. The New York Times headline that grabbed our attention and sparked our interest in this topic read, "As pandemic took hold, suicides rose among Japanese women." In 2020 alone, nearly 7,000 women took their own lives, putting the country at one of the highest suicide rates in the world. So we went looking for a local expert to understand why. Dr. Yuko Kawanishi is a sociologist based in Tokyo who specializes in mental health, gender and family relations, and contemporary Japanese social issues.
Sabrina, Dr. Yuko breaks down for us the unique expectations that Japanese culture places on women, and we explore how some of those dynamics were exacerbated by the pandemic. But perhaps more interesting than that, our conversation actually shed light on the gender dynamics in Japan at large. I, for one, was shocked to learn how poorly the country ranks on global gender equity indices and how men's mental health is actually being impacted as women push for greater opportunity and representation.
Right, and there's still so much work to be done. From destigmatizing mental health services to lifting the intense shame and victim blaming being put on women, there's a lot to learn from this conversation and quite a bit left to do. Take a listen. Okay, Dr. Yuko Kawanishi, thank you so much for joining us today on what we feel is a very timely issue about mental health in Japan.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this.
So you specialize in contemporary Japanese social issues, and I'd like to understand a little bit better how modern demands on women specifically conflict with some of the the traditional cultural expectations and frameworks in Japan.
Talking about the status of Japanese women, it's pretty embarrassing. Japan is the third largest economy, implying that the third most sophisticated industrialized Western country. Having said, nevertheless, we do have a pretty nice, level of education and hygiene and all that kind of things. But when it comes to the status of women, that's like a bottom. There is this famous international, I forgot which organization it was. So really, the famous organization that comes up with the result of international gender equality index. And I think the latest one is they covered almost 140 nations and checking, based on their own indicators. And Japan is like 121st.
That's surprising.
No, and I've noticed this almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years. And Japanese society, Japan started to take up this as an issue. Oh yeah, in those days Japan was still the second largest economy. But anyway, it's pretty embarrassing. It hasn't changed. Even now we have a wonderful constitution, and we are in which men and women's rights are absolutely equal. And it's like the same in the United States and many highly industrialized Western nations.
So you're saying that even though legally and on paper, men and women should be treated equally, of course, in society and culturally, those things have not progressed. And I want to dig into that a little bit more because traditionally, Japan is a pretty stoic culture, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure that's placed on both men and women to excel professionally. And women have become much more professionally focused than in decades before, no longer solely relying on men to be the breadwinners of the family. And the implication of this is that men and women are getting married later. Sometimes they're even reserving sexual relationships for later in life. How does this pressure for professional performance impact mental health?
I think the reality, the general picture is that even they are, of course, giving, as growing up, all Japanese students are giving a lot of pressure from parents to excel in anything. And most Japanese women, they are very highly educated, and they also aim to get a job after they graduate and even graduate from college. But talking about excelling professionally, they stop at a certain level. And they have to make this come to this point of their life, oftentimes, if they choose to follow the path of their mother, like having a family. I have to choose one of them. And it's still the case. And many Japanese women, they do get a job after finishing the education. That is a big difference, let's say 50 compared to 40 years ago. Everybody thinks about men and women get a good job. But then having a family, marrying, and again, the marriage and becoming a mother, they just think that I just can't do both, so I have to make one of the, I have to choose one of them. And so a lot of Japanese women who are working, they retreat from the job market for a while. Once they realize that they get pregnant, or maybe more and more of them continue to work until they have a baby. But then when the baby is born, they also feel they have to choose. And after a while, when their children are big enough, they would like to go back to the labor market, and they started to work again. But the picture, environment surrounding their work and the choices are vastly different, and that's really affecting the Japanese woman's mental health.
What about the stigma around mental health? You did your training in the United States. You now practice in Tokyo. How does that compare and contrast between these two, radically different cultures?
We do have a stronger sense of stigmatization and shame. And plus, I think that many people still lack the knowledge about professional help out there. There are these people, these professional and support systems is increasing its visibility far more compared to, 10, 20 years ago. We're making progress, but people just don't quite think about, I'm so distressed, so let's go to professional people. That, I believe, comes much easier to people in America.